I saw a humanoid something in the woods outside my childhood home. This was rural northern Wisconsin, and I was 14. Until about that day, I had zero fear of the woods. I spent most of my time out there exploring, and I feared nothing. My parents had a lousy marriage and fought a lot, so I felt more at home outside than in the house. On hot nights, I'd take a sleeping bag and sleep on the roof of an old shack on our property. I saw bears, wolves, but they were always more afraid of me than I was of them. I didn't believe in ghosts, Bigfoot, demons, or even God. Only got lost out there once when dark fell sooner than I expected, but I stayed calm and found the North Star. Knew that if I continued south, I'd eventually come across the old railroad tracks near my house. Even the thought of spending the night out there didn't bother me. The thought of my mom's rage when I didn't come home did. So it was summer. I'd just turned 14. My mom had left my father. Father worked all the time. Sister was living on her own. When school was out, it was me and my cat. And this is before the internet or smartphones. I lived on a dead-end dirt road, and around noon I took my usual stroll down the long driveway to check the mail. My cat followed me everywhere, and I actually kind of relied on him to give me a heads up if there was a bear or something close by. A bit of a movement behind me as I stood at the mailbox made me aware there was something across the road in the trees, but there were pesky deer everywhere. I heard a loud crash then, like something very loudly making its way through the brush. It's like every goddamn classic horror story. My brain had no capability for the thought of anything paranormal or spooky. Simply tucked the mail under my arm and headed into the woods to investigate. My cat followed close behind. Got about 10 yards in when I noticed what I hadn't noticed before. There was no noise. Nothing. It was a beautiful June day. There wasn't a single bird singing. No insects. No leaves rustling. It was absolutely silent. At the same time I registered the silence, I got that eerie feeling that something was watching me. I stopped immediately and started scanning the woods for deer. Hunters know what I'm talking about when I say you look for the shape of the deer, instead of trying to pinpoint them by color. That's when I spotted it. 2 brown furry legs. The top of it was concealed by tree branches. Went to sigh with relief when my cat hissed. I looked down and he was completely poofed out with his back arched, looking at the same thing I was. I looked back up and the legs moved. Not like a deer, but like a human. Everything happened at once after that. I dropped my mail, picked up my cat by the scruff and ran for it. Whatever was out there with me was running after me. I've never run so fast in my entire life. I tore up the driveway, into the house, and locked the door and grabbed the phone. I called my next-door neighbor, who was the ex-chief of police, and he came over immediately with his pistol. He checked out the spot I was in and found nothing. I was so hysterical that I was in tears, and he stayed with me until I was able to reach my mom and have her come get me. Of course, they thought I was completely high or delusional. I know exactly what I saw and felt. It was broad daylight. Never felt safe in those woods again, and stopped sleeping outside. I was working at a summer camp in the PNW one year. On the second or third night there, I was jogging alone back from the staff campfire to the cabin, where the campers and my co-counselor slept. I'm walking in this big grassy throughway that has some taller reeds separating it from a shore of the Puget Sound. It's probably 2 a.m., full moon. As I'm jogging, I see this person in the reeds. It's wearing a white gown and it has no face, just hair. I only noticed it because as I approached it, it stood up from a crouched position and backed up a few steps only to crouch down again. I could still see it crouching there like it was waiting. Its movements told me that it wasn't human. My knees gave out and I felt flooded with fear as I collapsed. I tried to run back to my cabin, but my legs just wouldn't work. I crawled and scrambled there on all fours, tried to scream but no sound came out, just gasping. Finally got to my cabin and fumbled with the doorknob for what felt like a minute before I could get it open. I closed the door and stood there waiting for a while inside. I didn't hear anything outside, but I still barely slept. At some point later that night I remember laughing, thinking, oh, it was just one of the campers peeing. I was hysterically laughing at myself for like 20 minutes, then fell asleep. Next morning, though, I realized that no campers returned to the cabin that could have potentially been out there that night. I asked all of them, and all of them said they hadn't gone out to pee the previous night. I'll add that this was a camp that was overtly for non-religious, skeptically minded staff and campers, of which I was and still largely am. I have no explanation for what I saw that night. Still scares the shit out of me just typing this. I was reading a library book before bed one night when I was a teenager. It was something really boring I'd checked out for a history project for school and couldn't keep my eyes open. I fell asleep with it on my bed, but I had like a sleep paralysis event happen, and I watched this shadowy figure of a man walk into my room, look around, pick up a few knickknacks, put them back down. It was so terrifying. My entire body was screaming to move, but I couldn't. Not even my fingers. I just wanted to scream for help, but nothing happened. No matter how desperately I tried, I finally got enough courage to look at the man, but he wouldn't come into focus for some reason. He was just a shadow, like he wasn't even there. He came up to the side of my bed and stood over me, looking down at me for what felt like forever. I was so terrified, but I couldn't move a muscle. Then he reached down and grabbed my library book, turned and walked out of the room. I never found that library book, ever, even after tearing apart my room and my house. My mom said it was a coping dream for losing the book, but I distinctly remember falling asleep reading it that night. I had even sent a text to my boyfriend that night saying that I wish I'd chosen a different book because this one was putting me to sleep. My name is Paxton, and my experience occurred in Western Canada on October 24th of 2015. I won't go into too many details about myself. What's important is the story that I have to share with you. I have to get it off my mind, off of my shoulders, because it was haunting me for so long. I wake up in the middle of the night with cold sweats and trembling from fear. Consider this a catharsis. I used to think the world was simple. That things are as you see them, and that was that. Shit happens, and there's nothing you can do about it. Never believed in strange things, and by that I mean the paranormal or supernatural. Now I don't know what to think. I don't know the best way to describe my experience. I guess I could call it a paradigm shift. I am, or was, an urban explorer. Used to love going to abandoned places such as hospitals, apartment buildings, warehouses, etc. It was the sense of adventure and discovery of these derelict places that drew me to it. A friend of mine, that I'm going to call Joseph, found a rural place, an old farmhouse an hour out of town. It was in an isolated site that you had to go out of your way to get to, but it was well worth it, he said. It's one of those places, you know. The family was murdered by someone unknown, and now the place is forever haunted by vengeful ghosts. Also, it was a place where satanic rituals took place and demonic spirits now haunt the area. I didn't believe any of that shit though, as every town has these stories that are made up by kids to scare one another. Fact of the matter is that nobody truly knows what happened. What we do know is that the family vanished, as if they simply got up and left. All their belongings, their stuff, was left behind. That, of course, happened 30 years ago, and the place has stood silent ever since. October 24th was a wet and gray autumn day. Scattered showers soaked the highway. In order to get to the house, we had to drive off the pavement and onto a muddy dirt road surrounded by rows and rows of trees that swayed in the wind. It was a 2-story house with a peaked roof and a dormer attic. At one time, it would have been a peaceful and comfortable place for a family to live. Now it was a dilapidated shell of its former self. The surrounding farm grounds concealed by trees, nature had reclaimed the place for herself. Despite the condition, I was pleasantly surprised to see the lack of graffiti and damage usually left by teenagers. Just a few empty beer bottles left on the front deck of the house. The windows and front door were boarded up, and the back door, however, was wide open. The boards were removed and tossed to the side. "I was like that when I checked the place out last week," Joseph explained. We continued exploring the exterior property. There were a couple of sheds out back and an old beat-up corpse of a truck. In the field beyond the truck, I noticed a collection of white stones. loads of them scattered about on the ground. "I didn't notice that earlier," Joseph remarked with an inquisitive look on his face. Looking at the stones carefully, they seemed to form a spiral pattern. Intrigued, we approached the stones. I don't know if I imagined it or what, but I swore I could smell ozone. You know, the aroma of lightning? I crouched down and examined one of the stones, and noticing something etched onto its surface. It was a symbol of some sort that I wasn't familiar with. Like a triangle, only with the bottom line missing, and the other ends of the other two, one with a squiggly circle and another with a T-shape. I looked at another stone, and it had the same etching on it. "That's fucking bizarre. I wonder what all this is," Joseph said as he took a look. I shook my head, not knowing what to say. We approached the back of the house. Flashlights at the ready, we entered the house one at a time. We were greeted by what appeared to be the kitchen. It was cold inside the building. Cold and gloomy, as expected, of course. Besides our flashlights, only diluted sunlight peeked through the boards covering the windows. There was a mess of debris scattered about on the floor. Pots, pans, plates, and utensils. A large wooden dinner table covered in 3 decades worth of dust stood in the center of the kitchen. The fridge and sink coated in rust. Paint was peeling off the walls. But besides the mess, just as outside, the place was free of vandalism. We next moved into the living room, which was rather large with rodent-infested couches and sofas. The coffee table was flipped onto its side, and with a television set with a screen that was caked in untold amounts of dust. The air had the distinct smell of mold and piss. Dusty old books and newspapers and magazines sat on the floor in stacks. Near the front entrance to the house was a set of stairs going up to the 2nd floor. I approached the brick fireplace and shined the flashlight. There was what appeared to be a photograph. Picked it out of the confined space and blew the ancient dust off of it. It appeared to be a family photo, only with the faces had been scratched out on every person. "This has to be the family," I muttered under my breath. "What's that?" Joseph asked as I handed it to him. I placed the photo onto the mantel. I shined the flashlight onto the walls and revealed the portraits on the walls. I assumed they were of the family, but just with the photograph, the faces were too scratched out here. On further examination, I noticed that the faces were scratched out in a spiral fashion. It felt like a snake was slithering around my spine. "What do you think happened to him?" I asked. "Nobody knows. They just up and left, I guess. There's no sign of foul play or anything like that. Beyond that, I don't know," Joseph explained as he gazed at the pictures. "Where do you suppose that goes?" Joseph pointed out as he directed the light at the end of the adjacent hallway. The door was slightly ajar. I gently nudged it open, and a set of descending stairs led down into the basement. "Well, Paxton, do you want to check out the basement first, or the upstairs?" Joseph asked with a crooked smile. "Let's go downstairs and get it over with," I joked. Little did I know that I was making a huge mistake. Shining the light into the inky blackness, we were assaulted by a powerful smell of mold. It was even worse now. The steps creaked under my footsteps, and as I hit the 4th step, there was a loud crunching sound as the step gave out beneath me. For a fraction of a second, I was suspended mid-air, and for that fraction of a second, I knew that I messed up big time. I just had enough time to open my mouth and scream. Part of the staircase joined my descent into the dark basement. I fell into tepid water that was several inches thick. My feet contacted with the hard cement floor, and I twisted my right ankle. Boards fell on top of my head as I slumped face first into the water. My screams were strangled by the nasty, bitter-tasting water. I jerked my head out of the disgusting, murking liquid in the darkness. I gagged and choked, spitting out the stagnant fluids, crying out in complete shock. Tried to stand up, but stumbled as burning pain shot up my leg from my ankle. I slumped against the wall. "Oh shit, Paxton!" Joseph shouted from above. I fished around the water for the flashlight that was surprisingly still working, although the light was now flickering on and off. I felt a burning sensation on my chest and back. I examined myself with the flashlight and saw broken splints of wood embedded into my skin, rivulets of blood dripping out of the wounds. Oh shit, I cried to myself. "You okay?" Joseph called out again. No, I weakly said. I'll get you out of there, just hold on, man. Joseph shouted as he took off. I cried out, but he didn't hear me. Of all the times we explored abandoned places, we never found ourselves in a situation like this. We always made a habit of exploring places inside and out, leaving no stone unturned. I pushed myself up against the wall, shivering from the cold darkness of the submerged basement. I shined the flashlight to check my surroundings. The beam of light could barely penetrate the darkness. The brick walls dripped with a detestable ichor and mold. The water continued to ripple in miniature waves from my movements as I tried to get a better look at the basement. Everywhere I looked, I saw black. That's when I heard something splashing, as if something was rising from the water. I saw movements in the darkness. The silhouette of a shape rising from the water caused me to freeze like an animal caught in the headlights of an oncoming vehicle. The realization that I was not alone in the basement took hold. My mind simply refused to process what my eyes were observing. I shined the light at the shape, but I could not illuminate its form. It was as if the light was being absorbed by it. Something was very wrong here. I didn't dare to ask who was there. I tried to move, but a jolt of sharp pain shot through my body. I cried out in agony as if, in response, the shape slowly moved towards me. A nauseating stench soon overpowered me. It was a stench that I knew all too well. One summer many years ago when I was a kid, the chain came off my bike when I was riding with some friends. I ended up in a ditch just inches away from the pulpy remains of a deer. It was the smell, that same smell. The smell of death was in the basement here with me now. "Joseph!" I cried, tears running down my face. The shape was drifting towards me. Soon I heard heavy footfalls upstairs, but by this point my heart felt like it was going to explode. Terror had a death grip on me. "Joseph, get me out of here now. There's something down here with me." I continued to plead. I saw it. A pale, gaunt face was illuminated by my flickering light. It had a long neck. Its eyes were black pupils surrounded by blood-red sclera. The thing instantly closed the gap between us, and it was right in my face. It let out a scream, and that's when everything went black. When I came to, I found myself in Joseph's truck. We were speeding down the highway. He brought me to the hospital, and I was treated for my injuries. Even had to take medical leave from work as well. I was unable to concentrate, and I looked terrible. I've been back to the doctors, but I couldn't tell them about the experience, so I told them I was under a lot of stress. Spoke to my friend Joseph about what happened that day at the abandoned farmhouse. Told him what I saw in the basement, and he was as pale as a ghost when I explained it to him. He nodded his head in agreement, said he saw it too. When he returned with the ladder he got from his truck, he looked to find me. For a nanosecond, he saw that I was in fact not alone. Gazed up at him and dissolved into the darkness. That's when he saw me black out. I think we were both in a state of shock. What was that thing in the basement? That face has forever been burned into my mind. The image of that thing, that scream. Was it a roar or a cry? I don't know. I've never been back to that place, and I know that I never will go back. I've given up my exploration hobby, and so has Joseph. I think it's safe to say that we both have been changed that day. I relive that encounter almost every night in my dreams. Sometimes I get the feeling that I'm being watched by something. Sometimes I think I hear scratching noises coming from inside the walls. But I think that's in my mind only. I haven't told my parents about this, or my siblings. The only thing they know is that I had an accident exploring an abandoned house. What would I even say to them? My former hobby could be considered dangerous. Besides injury from structural problems, you could run into animals or dangerous people. All that time, I never experienced any of those. Instead, I had an encounter with the unknown. In the heart of a sleepy town, nestled beneath a canopy of ancient oaks, there stands my house. It's seen generations pass, its walls echoing with the laughter of children and the whispers of elders. but within its time-worn embrace a darkness lurks unseen by the naked eye. It began innocently enough with a faint rustling in the dead of the night. I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on my mind, but as the nights wore on, the rustling grew louder, more insistent, like the gnashing of teeth against bone. My nights became restless, my dreams invaded by a shadowy figure lurking in the corners of my mind. I would awaken to find myself drenched in sweat, the sensation of unseen eyes boring into my very soul. One fateful evening, as the moon hung low in the sky, I heard it, the soft pitter-patter of feet, barely audible over the thudding of my heart. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, as the unmistakable sound drew closer and closer, creeping ever nearer to my sanctuary. With trembling hands, I reached for the lamp by my bedside, fingers fumbling in the darkness for the switch. Just as my trembling fingers found purchase on it, the room was bathed in a harsh, fluorescent light, and there, in the corner of my room, stood the creature. Its form was twisted, a grotesque amalgamation of nightmares. Its skin was pale and translucent, stretched tightly over emaciated limbs that seemed to contort and writhe with each movement. Its eyes, black pits devoid of any emotion, bore into my very soul, sending shivers down my spine. The creature's mouth curled into a sickening grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth that seemed to glisten with an otherworldly hunger. Long, sinewy fingers tipped with a razor-sharp claws twitched with anticipation, eager to rend flesh from bone. With a guttural growl, the creature advanced, its movements unnaturally fluid like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a thunderous reminder of my impending doom. I tried to scream, to plead for mercy, but no sound escaped my lips as the creature drew nearer, its breath hot against my skin. In that moment, I knew that I was at the mercy of a being far beyond any of my understanding. A creature of nightmares has come to claim me as its own, and as it loomed over me, its twisted form casting a shadow over my trembling body, I realized with a sinking dread that there would be no escape from the darkness that lurked within the confines of my own home. As the creature loomed closer, its twisted form casted a suffocating shadow over me. A primal fear gripped every fiber of my being. Time seemed to slow to a crawl, each heartbeat echoing in the deafening silence of the room. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, I fought against the paralysis that held me captive, scrambling backward until my back pressed against the cold, unforgiving wall. But no matter how hard I tried to escape, there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from the nightmare that had come to claim me. The creature's grotesque grin widened, revealing a cavernous maw that seemed to stretch impossibly wide, hungry for my fear. Its putrid breath watched over me, filling my nostrils with the stench of decay. I gagged and I could feel bile rising in the back of my throat. Desperation clawed at my chest as I searched for a means of escape, but every avenue was blocked by the sinister presence that loomed before me. And as the creature reached out with its elongated fingers, I braced myself for the inevitable agony that was to come. But just as the creature's icy touch grazed my skin, a blinding light pierced through the darkness, searing my retinas with its brilliance. I shielded my eyes, crying out in pain and relief as the creature recoiled, its unearthly shriek reverberating through the room. Through squinted eyes, I saw a figure materialize in the doorway, a beacon of hope in the midst of the darkness. It was a friend, a neighbor, drawn by the echoes of my screams to investigate the horrors that lurked within my home. With a defiant shout, my savior charged forward, wielding a weapon of light and steel against the encroaching darkness. The creature hissed and snarled, lashing out with all its monstrous fury, but the light of righteousness burned bright, driving it back into the shadows from whence it came. As the last echoes of the creature's haunting cries faded into the night, I collapsed to the floor, shaken but alive. My savior helped me to my feet, offering words of comfort and reassurance as we fled the accursed house, leaving the darkness behind us. Though the scars of that night would linger forever, I knew that I was not alone in the fight against the horrors that lurked in the shadows. As we stepped out into the cool embrace of the night, I vowed to never again let the darkness claim me as its own.